Hello, Lukhanyo.
Hi.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I am in studio with Lukhanyo, and I think as I typically do in these conversations, I start by introducing myself. My name is Bui Mafoko. I'm an entrepreneur, luxury consultant, speaker, as well as researcher that really has her eyes set on growing Africa's luxury growth. Africa and Luxury, the podcast, is a luxury education platform that chronicles the story of Africa and draws context and connection to the tastemakers thereof. And I certainly have one in studio today. This podcast embarks on a series of culturally rich conversations seeking to explore, inform, and create a unique definition and discovery of African luxury. On each episode, as we will today, we draw context from the richness of the continent to chronicle the story of African luxury through the perspective of art and the artists contributing to the various sectors. Today we're speaking fashion, and I can't wait for us to delve in. And as I've mentioned, my guest is Lukhanyo Mdingi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Is the pronunciation good?
On point.
I've pulled on my Xhosa-ness
Lukhanyo.
Lukhanyo, which means ukhanya, light.
Light, yeah.
Light.
Exactly that.
So Lukhanyo, I think introduce yourself to our guests. Lukhanyo, guys, has honored us. He's flown all the way from Cape Town, not just for us, but he's squeezed us in. So we really appreciate that.
No, it's such a pleasure. So I'm really thankful for your time, and it's a pleasure to make this happen. So just to give you a brief scope of who I am, my name is Lukhanyo Mdingi, and I'm a Cape Town-based fashion designer. Mm-hmm. And I'm a young Xhosa man from the Eastern Cape, and I have quite a deep love for my career, which is fashion design specifically. Mm-hmm. But it's now recognizing what that gift is and how I can be of service and of purpose to others. So through the trajectory of my career in these last 8 years specifically, I've really wanted to see how I can use design and entrepreneurship as a means of service to having a point of view that goes hand in hand with the change that I'm wanting to see within the world.
I have to sigh because it's loaded and it's beautiful at the same time. And I think this is why we wanted to get you into studio, because when you speak service, you speak to me. I always say that I love through service. And even this podcast is a form of service for me. There's so much I want to get into, but before we start, I don't want to miss the opportunity to properly introduce you, not to take away from your creds. So Lukhanyo, eponymously named after the designer himself, who I have in studio today. The Lukhanyo Mdingi brand is a transcendental fashion label of global standing, truly of global fashion, of global standing. And I think by the end of this conversation, a lot of our listeners will know why, or viewers, if you're viewing this podcast. He debuted in 2015 and has made notable strides in the fashion industry, which have significantly set him apart at the onset of his career. With its foundations in Cape Town, he's already mentioned that he hails from Cape Town, the beautiful Cape Town. The LM brand draws its essence really from consideration, which we'll unpack a little bit more here, because I don't want us to get so jargony that people miss out on the beauty of this discussion. Consideration, community, timeless design to define its sustainability persona. And sustainability as a term, I think, is a buzzword everywhere, whether every commercial sector is speaking sustainability and the implication that has on them. So I'd love for us to really deduce what it means from the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand. The label is an experience of creative ingenuity, constantly evolving the boundaries of fashion by harnessing the human spirit. They are constantly on a pursuit to preserve the essence of African craftsmanship, continually collaborating with artisans such as weavers. I know there's weavers specifically from Cape Town, as well as textile designers from across the continent. And we'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Their approach to design is a practice that is centered around these relationships that they've built. And I think craftsmanship really just, if I'm to pull out nuggets, craftsmanship is one of the pinnacles really of this brand. As I was saying, that it is from these symbiotic connections, that Lukhanyo conceptualizes the collection. Lukhanyo Mdingi conceptualizes so I'm going to struggle with this because I'm sitting here with Lukhanyo Mdingi and the label itself is
No
Lukhanyo.
worries.
So you're going to have to give me some grace there. We've also deeply connected with the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand because of its ability to reimagine and reinstate dignity and notoriety in their garment production process. This also aligns with what we do here at Noble, which is restoring nobility to Africans and to Africa. Key milestones, I will not miss this part. We had to brag. Lukhanyo Mdingi has exhibited select archival bodies of work at the V&A Museum in London. I missed that ever so slightly. I was in London slightly after, but a lot of the people that I met when I was studying there, I know, just raved about it. Lecturers,
Fantastic.
Other people that I made network with, as well as in Brooklyn, New York. He is a former recipient of the LVMH Karl Lagerfeld Prize in 2021, and was a finalist of the ANDM.
Correct.
Fashion. I'm trying. All these acronyms. ANDM Fashion Brand in 2022. And most recently, and this is so good because this is the whole reason. Can I say?
Of course.
This is the whole reason why he's in Joburg.
Of course.
He has been named the honorary recipient of the AMIRI Prize in 2023. Honey.
Thank you.
And tonight he is in Joburg for the store opening.
Yes.
In Sandton.
Yes, I am.
So can't wait to hear about that. Shall we get in?
Let's get in.
Are
Let's
you
do
ready?
It. Please start from the top.
And this heat today, but we'll compose ourselves.
Yes.
So Lukhanyo, I think as a starting point, a natural question would be, what is fashion to you?
Well, I mean, I think it's, aside from it being a medium of clothing and style and sensibility, I think it's something that can be used to really express yourself. I mean, the same way that music can uplift a mood, I really believe that fashion has the power to represent something that shows a sense of confidence and a sense of representation of who you are as a human being. And I believe in that spirit, and I think I believe in it because also I'm such a visual person. It's an instant language. You see it immediately. And I think that's why fashion is something that's incredibly important.
How then did you get into fashion? And I ask this question because, people think, fashion designer, want to either make it into the career, or I don't think we never really see, or the story is never told enough as to how people actually even access or consider this as an industry to pursue.
No, 100%. And I do definitely think that's something that's changing just based on how the world is moving right now. But as a 90s child, fashion was never necessarily a thing that was a celebrated career within the context of my own home or even just my immediate environment. But it was something that I saw within media, and that was just through advertising, that was through soapies such as The Bold and the Beautiful, that was such as also including Generations and Boom Shaka and Jam Alley. Like, there was such a strong fusion between music and fashion, and it's something that I fell in love with quite instantly. And that's where the seed was essentially planted for me. I just knew that one way or another I had to be a part of this particular medium and this industry.
Right.
I didn't necessarily know how, but I knew that I was really in love with just the whole spirit of just what it made me feel, especially when I looked at other people that had like a beautiful attire and the confidence that essentially came with it.
Right.
So I wanted to be a part of that, and that's where the seed was essentially planted. And it was years of pruning, essentially. I think just being a 5-year-old kid, watching this and then going into school, junior school, practicing art, practicing design, I think I was definitely plowing the foundation of where I already am today.
Right.
And then by the time I was in matric, that's now where you're obviously having to take the more pragmatic approach of looking at institutions to study. And fashion design was my only option. Like, it was literally my only option.
Who are your parents and can I meet them? Because, well, depending on when, right? Because some don't support it. And I think the benefit of this podcast is to also bring the insight into language,
Of course.
and really educating a potential grade 11, grade 10 student, whatever it may be, who may be listening to this thinking, how do I even broach the subject? So how did that conversation even happen?
Well, it was actually quite easy. I think I'm coming from a family where it's a family of 5 kids and I'm the youngest.
Okay.
And I'm very aware of the dynamics just within that whole context of being the youngest and the privileges that come with being the youngest. And there really are privileges. And I think I'm also a testament to that. But by the time it got to me, the parenting style was just so loose that I had like 4 older siblings that kind of took the brunt of so many things.
Right.
And like most older siblings do, I guess. So by the time it actually got to me, my family was just so relaxed about it.
Okay.
I mean, there were certain family members that had concerns, but the concerns were based on just not having enough knowledge of the industry.
Certainly.
And but I think the reason why they were also able to support it was because they always saw that I had a love for it. So it felt like a no-brainer to them, and they weren't necessarily surprised when I said I want to become a fashion designer. And but I also did want to do a lot more research to show them that there are other fields within the fashion industry that you can go into, aside from fashion design itself. So I wanted to prove that there's still definitely options that are out there that I believe are very much viable careers. And it was just simply doing the research and letting my family know.
I think that's such an important caveat that you raise, just around the children also have a responsibility, or because you may not be a child, you may also wanting to pivot a career into fashion from corporate or whatever. So there's also something so important about getting into your confidence, the people around you, because whether you're failing or you're experiencing challenges or eventually succeeding in the career, right? These are the same people that you want to find refuge in. So I quite enjoy that. Besides the perk of being the last one where your parents were a little bit more lax, I quite enjoy that.
Yeah.
You also felt a strong conviction to sell it. As with anything, I think true to the entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, because I believed in it.
Because you believed in it. I love that. How would you say, and we've spoken a little bit about how you were exposed to it, how you entered it, how would you say your own heritage, culture, history, even traditions and customs at home? I think we never, particularly here, we're speaking about African luxury, and we never regard those spaces as sources of inspiration or where creativity could be born. So how would you say your own heritage, history, Xhosa heritage that is, has shaped your own lens of creativity even?
There's a very specific culture that was created in my household, and that culture was something that was very communal. And I think that's a testament that's within all Black households, specifically coming from Africa. You heard me earlier on saying my parents and also my siblings, but my siblings are technically my distant cousins, but we don't talk like that, Akai.
Certainly.
And it's literally a situation like that where moving in the spirit of community and understanding that a collective is far greater than a singular is a practice that is very much the essence of how we operate within our brand. So having that culture from Ekaya and back home, things that my aunt, my mom had instilled within all of us in terms of recognizing that we are all family and we are all a collective and we must always be essentially there for one another, is a sentiment that I practice, and it's something that I feel is pretty much the core essence of the brand within itself. And that's something that's evidently seen within our approach to collaboration and how certain individuals over these last number of years have used their time, their talent, and their trust as a means of service to the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand. But it's because they understand that the Lukhanyo Mdingi institution as a whole is something that's far beyond myself, but it's a reflection where they're able to see themselves within it. So I think just looking at culture and looking at my heritage and looking at the foundation of my life and my home, that really is how it has penetrated into the point of view that we essentially have today.
And thank you for that, because it is so pervasive throughout. I mean, even just interacting with your team before this, preparing for the interview, I think that sense of belonging already, where people, even with you, I think we've only before now interacted virtually, but that sense of connection and belonging, I think, is something that's been very pervasive. So I can certainly attest that your brand and the culture that you've inculcated even in your organization has managed to really seep through into every area. So absolutely love that, because from a branding perspective, we disregard, most times we undervalue, because that's all equity. We undervalue even those first interactions, because I could have been a potential client seeking out a commission of a piece. And I've enjoyed that interaction. Craftsmanship is very central. It really also feels like the backbone, and correct me if I'm wrong, of your brand. Which parts of both history and craftsmanship have you drawn from to really come up with methods that are distinguishers, really come up with the creative direction of your brand? Because much like fashion, history and craftsmanship are principles of luxury. And I know you speak a lot about craftsmanship, and even in the collaboration with artisans from across the continent and probably the globe at this point, you know, it's drawing on some form of history to bring it into your interpretation and perception as to how you as a team come up with future collections.
Well, the core foundation of it comes down to really understanding who you're working with. For me, it's about leaning onto the ingenuity of these incredible craftsmen and women that are in these different parts of Southern Africa and Western Africa. And really understanding what that is and how we can work in accordance to their specific finesse. We're not necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel, but we're trying to essentially establish a design philosophy that is in conjunction with something that is already existing based on their heritage, and how that can lean onto what we're trying to create within the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand. We have this beautiful hybrid where it's this modern design together with artisanal sensibilities and how that essentially looks like together, right? But that is only achieved through the understanding and working hand in hand with these individuals that are incredibly gifted within their practice of textile development. So when we are within these spaces, being Kailicha or being in Burkina Faso specifically, it's really communicating, but also listening to their point of view and what can be done, what can't be done, and really respecting that. But also seeing what sensibility of the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand can be added onto a skill that has already existed, right? So that's how we pretty much work hand in hand with one another. So that's the sensibility side of it. But there's also a strong social impact side of it as well. Because for us, it's seeing how can we bring this artisanal sensibility and design into something that's still modern and contemporary and commercialized. So it's working hand in hand with our buyers and the retailers and sharing this point of view and making sure that those specific offerings that come from Burkina Faso or South Africa, these specific offerings are then bought and distributed to a larger market, because you want the larger market to experience these pieces. But the most important thing, we want the artisanal spaces such as the Palani community and also the Cabas community to have a strong sense of social impact, because essentially, as extraordinary as these individuals are, they're all coming from marginalized groups. So they essentially need the work to add onto their livelihoods. So that also becomes a really fundamental part as to why we move the way that we do.
There is something that you mentioned in this part of the response, which I'd like us to get into a little bit more. You know, when you speak about, first of all, I appreciate the aspect you have of really respecting and not coming as an expert, because I think the typical approach is you're the trained, qualified fashion designer. So if we just go really practical, what does that process look like in terms of time, in terms of actual collaboration? So what are we seeing happening in the studio or you in the communities? Because we know Africa has been susceptible to so much cultural appropriation, even by Africans themselves. Let's call it what it is. So I'm keen to help myself and my listeners understand what practically that process looks like. Because also I think we've seen many shows, right?
Yes.
Of what we think fashion designers do, but from a practical approach, what does that process look like in time? What does it look like in first interactions? What does it look like in pulling the collection together and making sure that you're maintaining you're maintaining and honoring the communities? Because I can expect as well that they want to turn around the work quickly enough to earn something. As you've mentioned, they are marginalized communities. And I think we sitting in this room can have an appreciation for that. So what does that actually look like?
Well, you have to be very strategic within your approach with this, because you have to have the very human side, but you also have to have the very the business and strategic side as well.
Right.
So planning is extremely important, and really just looking at the timetable of whether it's an 8-month project, right, for specifically a textile development. So once you understand what time frame you're working with, that's when you can start the communications of each specific textile community, right? So for us, we really understand the premise and the foundation as to what they can do, right? So it comes down to the designing of these specific textiles, but also the sourcing of the yarns, right? And the communication is actually, it's very simple. It's a sense of like, it literally like 1 + 1 literally equals 2. That's how simple it is, right? Because essentially we already know what textiles are available, but now it's really distinguishing the colors, the yarns, the weaving technique. How would that look like? What yarns do we essentially want to mix together? Do we want to introduce a metallic yarn? Do we want to introduce something that's a lot more organic? Is it all going to be organic? Do we want to introduce a wool, right? So we have to pretty much outline the design and how that looks like. And then that's where they come in with their ingenuity and they say what is possible, what is not, based on the presented design that we have presented, right?
So you in concept, big picture, sit and do this first before approaching.
Well, pretty much. But with that being said, because I too am privy to the development process and how the weaving of practice actually looks like, because it's something that I also had to physically learn myself. I already have an idea as to what is possible, but the reality is with these skills, there's so much finesse that I'm still not cognizant of at all. And it's that particular skill that I'm always that I'm essentially looking for to see how it can be essentially added. So even based on the presented designs that we would do within the label, I already know how it's essentially going to unfold, but I'm also leaning onto them to say, well, there is actually another technique that could actually enhance this. So that's how we approach the whole development of it. And it's very practical. We work on samples, we do little swatches, we do little tests, we do little wash tests as well. It's also a case to see like the tension, how the yarns actually mixing with one another. So that process can pretty much be 8 weeks, right? And then once we've established that and we've done all the points and we've checked off the tick boxes and so forth, then we're pretty much good to go.
Good to go.
Yeah.
So typically once that process is done, how long does it then take you to put a collection together? And are your collections, do you always drop in each season?
We used to. I mean, there's it depends on the period where we're at. There's periods where we've done 2 collections a year, and there's periods where we've done 1 collection a year. So it really just depends on what this internal strategy is and how we're wanting to approach it. And what I've realized with the business is that there's definitely different periods where there's immediate rise, and then there's a process where we want to take a step back, right?
I love that.
So within those times where we actively want to take a step back, that's when we'll focus on 1 collection a year, and then we'll re-strategize and see how that essentially looks like. And then again, there'll be 3 years in a row where we'll do 4 collections.
Yeah.
Multiple collections within 1 year, right? So it really just depends on where we're at. What we are essentially trying to do within our brand is to do things at our own terms. Actually, we living within a fashion cycle where there's these rules that are set into stone, and these rules are set into stone by high establishments. And I get it. It has a lot to do with business, but it also has a lot to do with demand,
the commerciality of the whole thing.
So we're living in a world where it's you have to think about the commercial viability, you have to think about capitalism. There's a high demand of things and stuff. So inherently, all of these rules of having 4 collections a year, it's somewhat in a way can get imposed onto you as a designer. But the reality is that can work for bigger conglomerates, but you really need to understand the size and the scale of your business and how you can move in accordance to that. I think it's really important to establish what your rules are, what that strategy is going to be, and communicate that succinctly with your partners, such as your retailers, your buyers, your internal team, and so forth.
I get that. I mean, is it an ambition of yours to ultimately become part of a big conglomerate? Because this is the very thing we're looking to challenge here, right? Around fashion is very cyclical. As you're saying, it has very clear timelines that are whoever the founding fathers that decide these are the seasons or these are the timelines. And there's certainly a huge authenticity to your brand that can't be faulted. What does then growth look like for you? And I love that you're doing it on your own terms, because I think it comes through, it comes to the fore. But what does growth look like? Because I'm also interested in probing, particularly within the African context. We don't have huge conglomerates, and you have already managed to break into your LVMHs, which is a monster of a conglomerate. And how do you manage to maintain that essence of the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand without being wooed into the direction of acquisition?
Of course. Well, it comes down to really knowing who you are and really being pressed to the mark of the higher prize. And that's obviously the bigger picture, right? So if you have that confidence that's grounded within knowing who you are and the bigger picture as to the intentions of why you are doing what you're doing, it will be quite difficult for you to be swayed, I believe. There's definitely moments of question, but I think what I've created is quite a strong cabinet of individuals that really believe in the spirit and the essence of the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand. And I find myself just conversing with them just to get a sense, and also just to perhaps even be a little bit reminded as to
why you started.
The
why. You spoke about a cabinet. Is that your team? I imagine you've got mentors.
Well,
and where do you go to when the creativity, because also, and I'm curious because, and I would imagine you don't struggle much with this, because it feels to me as though you always locate yourself back at the clarity of knowing what we're doing with this brand and always defaulting to the strategy, which I'd love to speak to as well, because there's a lot of brands that are maybe moving without a clear strategy, and you see by how they move in their business decisions. But to get back to the former part of my question, where do you go? Where do you create from? How do the collections come to you? What is the spirit behind the collections? And I suppose, how do you draw buy-in from your cabinet or from your team around that this is and are you the sole designer? These are questions that could seem very simple, but actually the answers aren't, because a lot of people, we may assume no, but they don't. So I really am trying to expose and tease out aspects that, someone doesn't get an opportunity to sit and ask.
No, of course. No, absolutely. Well, I think everything that we've done within the LM brand is very much an extension from the previous. So we're constantly looking at the archives, we're constantly looking at our previous point of view, and how do we expand upon that, right? For us, it's incredibly important to take that approach because everything then feels a lot more, the signature of it feels a lot more distinct, but we're able to see how we can progress from what we've done previously.
Okay.
So that's always been our approach to design. I think it's also really important to have a level of peace in my mind when I am designing or thinking of a point of view and a specific project, because what we're trying to essentially create is far beyond clothing, but it's an institution, and that institution is fundamentally using the spirit of design, entrepreneurship, creativity, again, as a means of purpose and representation. How does that essentially look like, right? And these things come through research, they come through a feeling, they come through my own personal experiences, my own personal interests, through conversations, through really paying attention to where is the world right now and what is essentially being spoken about and what can be added to the bigger picture of the now, right?
The zeitgeist.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, it's how you want to look at it. You know, in order for us to have a modern contemporary brand, we need to understand what conversations are happening within the world right now. And in order for us to expand ourselves, we need to understand that. But how do we now translate that within the Lukhanyo Mdingi way, right? So it's constantly looking at that and having the discourse with my team and seeing how that looks like, but always fundamentally coming down to what is the purpose, what is the intention,
the heart of it, the heart of it. I'm quite enjoying the point you raise about it being progressive, because it then starts to feel like an art for me, in that it's constantly evolving. And if you had a piece from one of the previous archived collections and you connect with a piece, because I think art is also a very personal thing, isn't it? So your fashion or your works then start to transcend just clothes, as you're saying, and they begin to become an experience, a spirited experience at that, a point of self-expression, perhaps. So quite like that. I mean, the traditional business modeling says target markets and all of that. And I don't get a sense that yours is limited to that definition of modeling of business, to say we are a menswear targeting 35 to whatever.
Yeah.
And, reading up and preparing for this conversation, I think the millennial consumers are certainly giving the industry, all industries, a point of a new perspective. And millennials in particular, like it says here, the emergence of new value systems, they're driving the emergence of new value systems and shifts in customer expectations, reshaping the luxury and fashion industry. And this is giving rise to a next generation of consumers and mindsets. Another note I pulled here, which was from a trend called Trend Hunter. It says that the millennials live an overtly conscientious contemporary lifestyle that is contemplated by their brand choices and purchase decisions for more ethically sourced brands, which yours certainly is, to align these to their personal values. How have you considered?
Well, think about it. What I said earlier on is that we constantly paying attention to the conversations that are being had within the world. In order for us to have the contemporary brand, we need to pay attention to what are people saying and what do people want, right? And I think within consumers and their purchases and how considerate they are, we needed to now create offerings and collections that have that high level of consideration,
right?
So they have that option. So by understanding the consumer needs, the consumer trends, the consumer rhythms, that also goes hand in hand with our strategy as to how we can cater to that. Because at the end of the day, it's also still a business that we have.
That too is most true. You've alluded to some of this already. I was quite intrigued by the luxury value chain, and I know you're quite particular in not defining yourself as a luxury brand, but just from even a fashion value chain, the industry needs to it has to somehow industrialize itself, particularly in Africa. And would you say you're one of the born global brands from a consumption or a purchase? Who are you? Who are your works? In whose closets are your works landing up in? And is it your disposition to maintain the true African essence of it? Particularly because your craftsmanship draws from the continent.
Well, I don't necessarily think the essence of who we are is ever going to be diluted, and in the sense that I'm African.
Yeah.
So everything that I do will always have a spirit.
Emanate from.
Exactly, you know.
I get that.
So that's not something that I'm ever too concerned about. However, what we have been really trying to strategize internally is how we can bring our offerings and make them a lot more accessible to our country, because right now a lot of our offerings are based on an international market that's outside of South Africa. And although that has been very beneficial in terms of business, we still definitely we want our fellow South Africans to actually feel connected to the brand.
Okay.
So that is why there's a whole other strategy that will be essentially implemented, where offerings of the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand are a lot more accessible, but people will have the opportunity to feel who we are, not just through the clothing, but also just through the experiences and activations that will be taking place moving forward.
When you say accessible, is it accessible from a price point, from a retailing front?
Absolutely. From price, from retailing, from offerings. It's the product lines that we have planned for e-commerce are not pertain to just clothing.
Okay.
It goes into home, it goes into print, it goes into accessories. It goes into also just audio as well. So the idea is to really create a universe where there's a little bit of something for nearly everyone, if not everyone.
So I love that, because there's different points of entry that people can experience the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand.
Exactly.
What is your perception of African fashion right now? I mean, you say you've been listening to the conversations, contemporary, I don't know, what is happening contemporarily. And what is your perception of African fashion right now, and, you know, its role on the world stage? So what role is African fashion playing on the world stage?
Truthfully, I've always thought that African fashion, or actually anything and everything coming from our continent, is really powerful. The reality now is that with the use of technology and media and people just obviously paying attention to different parts of the world outside from the north, there's a lot more conversations that are circling around African fashion, African music, African art.
The beauty that is Africa.
Exactly, 100%. And we really are beautiful, but we've always known that, but I think the world is only recognizing that now. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with our point of views. I think as Africans, we're all natural storytellers, and our stories are so community driven in all aspects. When I think about music, specifically music, and when I even think about just fashion and music and where South African fashion and music is at right now, specifically right now, I think there's just such a strong want and need for a point of view and a narrative that just feels real. And I think people are experiencing that from the artists that are coming from Africa as a whole, right?
Yeah.
So to know that we are, and when I say we, I'm talking about specifically the LM label, and together with my peers such as Teba Mugugu and Musa Maxwell and Wanda Lepoto and Richard Nisi, and Sindisa Kumalo, there really is
the abundance of African.
No, but there really is such a beautiful renaissance of African contemporary fashion designers that are penetrating spaces that are even outside our country.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of visibility globally. And that's something that hasn't really happened before within the context of South African designers. And I could say the same for music, I guess.
Yeah.
And it feels really powerful, but it also feels like it's a forever thing. I think we are all holding spaces for a level of representation. And there's a 10-year-old kid from the Eastern Cape that's probably at Hudson Park right now that is looking at a Lukhanyo Mdingi and feeling as though that they can do it too.
Feeling seen, feeling...
Exactly. So I'm so aware of that. I'm so aware of it. I'm so aware of the importance of it. So the institutions and what we're doing is something that's really far beyond ourselves. It's not just clothes. It's not just a point of view, but it's really just understanding that we're representing those that look like us.
Thank you. I think on behalf of and there's so many across the continent, and I have the pleasure of discovering them through the research that we do. And you were certainly, the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand and yourself were certainly one of the people that we connected with, as I mentioned. So I think you really are, it seems undiluted. It seems very, because, your Rich Mnisis and the peers that you've mentioned have been globally recognized. And it doesn't, for me, what I'm enjoying is the clarity that we're not just a source of inspiration for now. It's the final realization that Africa is actually the richness, the vibrancy, the spirited, colorful, beautiful continent. And finally, us ourselves walking into that. So I do hope, and are you seeing that actually? Because there's others coming behind you. Are you seeing more people moving with the confidence that they can?
Yeah, 100%. 100%, yes.
And do you realize your role in that?
Yeah.
You amongst others? Does that responsibility burden you? Yeah.
You know what? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a burden, but it's a responsibility.
It's a responsibility.
It's, if anything, it's quite a privilege to be part of history. And I know this period of time, we're adding onto a bigger picture of something that's far beyond ourselves.
That is so beautiful. I hope you sit in the knowledge that you are moving in purpose.
No, we definitely do.
I like that. You spoke also briefly around, Africa. There's a stat that says that there's more cell phones than people on the continent.
I had no idea.
There is.
I had no idea.
And I'm wondering, like I've always wondered about challenging the fashion high street model, which is a very European Western model, challenging the retail model even, because in Africa, there ought to be another perspective we can offer in terms of how we retail our fashion and luxury. If there are more cell phones than people, why are we not driving it with m-commerce and e-commerce? So purely just from around distribution strategies for the delivery of...
I'm sure that has a lot to do with just a cultural thing, in the sense of South Africa is still very much a developing country, right? It's not necessarily first world.
Right.
So the shopping consumer culture is not necessarily trying to buy things online. That's just not necessarily how the larger majority of our country operates. We're on survival mode. If we're going to buy something, we actually need to feel it and see it.
Yeah.
Shopping online, I think that actually is a bit of a privilege that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to essentially have. And so it's a cultural thing, and I think we just really need to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah. You're quite right in that we are an emerging market for luxury. And if we look at how luxury enters and develops in a market, retail is certainly the first interaction. But we've got so many challenges as Africa as well. Infrastructural, if you ask yourself, I'm not sure if you've ever wondered why beyond Cape Town or Sandton or, the bigger retail malls, why these big luxury conglomerates have not managed to move beyond this part of the continent. And I am wondering whether they are limiting what it could be on the continent by endeavoring to just consider an alternative to the fashion high streets, the museums of art, as they call them. And, Africa, it says here, has a thriving e-commerce sector, which is approximated at $20 billion. Which is vigorously supported by agriculture, which serves as a pipeline to industries such as the textile industry, which supplies fashion globally. And this is a stat from the African Development Bank. Dated 2016, probably much bigger than 20 billion US right now. What do you regard as important for fashion to develop on the continent?
A lot of strategy that has a lot to do with understanding the market. First of all, understanding the market that you're distributing in, understanding price points, understanding positioning, right? I think those are the key fundamental things that will drive growth, because in order to obviously sell well, you need to be situated within the right location, with the right price points, with the right community of target market that will essentially be buying into you. So that's essentially the fundamental of it, right? But with that being said, the buying power, depending on obviously which market you're really trying to break into, you need to make sure that it exists in order for that particular space of business to essentially grow.
Okay. Did you set out to appeal to the international market?
No, I think for us, I started off as a designer more than an entrepreneur. And I think for me, it's only over these last two years where the entrepreneurial spirit has really become more potent within my movements and my business. So for me, it was all about the point of view and just designing. That was always just like the fundamentals of it. But I think as I grew and understood the importance of really making the marriage between business and design work, interrogating the business side of it became quite a fundamental and important thing to do. And looking at our positioning and what makes sense for our business of the now in terms of distribution. Is it going to be offshore? Is it going to be local? How does that look like? And with the retail accounts that we had received over these last 2 years, being the Matches, the Selfridges, the Net-a-Porters, the H&Ws, Japan, the UK, Paris, like truthfully, the brand is actually available everywhere, except for it's available in our country, but not as strong as different parts of the world. We had to take that approach simply because we just needed to grow a bit more.
Okay.
And the cash was there, I guess, to be quite frank.
Yeah. And where are you retailing in SA?
So there's a store called Merchants on Long.
Love.
Yes. So we retail through them.
Beautiful store on Long Street in Cape Town.
And we will be distributing through our e-commerce that's set to launch within the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Cool, congratulations.
Thank you.
Because to get e-commerce right.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a steady approach. We want to see how people react to it, but also we want to see how we manage it, because it's a new chapter that the brand hasn't actually had the opportunity to do before. It's new territory.
Yeah.
So we all quite curious to see how that essentially looks like, and to make sure that there's enough foundation work for us to be prepared for this new beast called e-commerce.
Well, you got it. All of the very best. What innovative factors would you say are, you're already speaking e-commerce, which is one of them. Beyond that, what innovative factors are driving the growth of the LM brand? Because this will segue to my next question. But what would you say is driving?
Well, it's quite interesting because we have a very push and pull relationship with marketing, but that has a lot to do with our strategy. We want to be a brand that feels very communal, but also we do want to be a brand that has some level of mystery, if that even makes sense.
Illusion.
So, that's always something that's been quite potent within our strategy, in terms of like marketing, visibility. How does that look like? And that's just one of the key things that is just part of our growth, our implementation, our planning, I guess. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I think you've been very consistent in painting this picture for us, which for me is an indication of a very clear strategy. So I appreciate that. Is a flagship store, a Lukhanyo Mdingi
Well, I
flagship
mean,
store?
I think that comes with time, but that's not the priority right now. Right now, our priority for 2024, it's really actually e-commerce, and how does that look like, and having more exclusive offerings and playing around with e-commerce, having direct to consumer, having a bit of margin. So it's things like that we're really trying to focus on, and how can we create projects around our e-commerce for direct to consumer as well.
When we spoke, you defined sustainability as consideration, community, timelessness. How are you ascertaining that you're not being pulled or prescribed the definition of what's sustainable fashion?
Well, the reality is you will never really have full control as to what people say about you or what labels they decide to put on your label, your business, or what you decide to do, right? The control that we have internally is how we choose to communicate about who we are. We believe in having considerate practices within the practice of what we're doing, specifically within business and as well as textile development. But the reality is it's us going from 0 to 10, not 0 to 100, and really trying to learn as to how those systems essentially look like, right? Because we are not perfect at all. We have our moments of failures, which look like opportunities to pivot, and how that essentially looks like within business or within production or within design, within marketing, and everything that comes in between. So we consistently trying to consider our movements with those that we essentially work with. And I think, to me, because there's so much consideration that goes into it, that to me becomes the practice of what someone else might consider as sustainable.
Sustainability, like a more discerning practice to business. How do you feel, because there's a question around, and I was speaking to an IP attorney around with this, around who owns culture and therefore who owns craftsmanship, right? And you work with artisans and local centers of creative centers of excellence, if I may. How do you feel we could, and you've got more information on this than I am potentially, because you've been on the ground with it. How do we preserve our craftsmanship as Africans? How do we, if there's women or men that are farming specific yarn and dyeing it in a specific method, how do you feel, what is the responsibility or even the how of preserving these cultural centers across Africa?
Well, there's two things. It's consistency and it's visibility, right? So you need to actively be consistent with those that you are working with within these spaces, so people can actually actively see it. But the visibility side of things is that you also need to be very transparent as to who you are working with, because
I like that so much.
For it to grow and for it to be preserved, I would want other people to work with the textile communities in Cabas and also Pilani, and also the future ones that we are still going to be working with. It's important that people know who they are, so they too can have be in a position where they can preserve all the things that they're doing in terms of their practices. So for me, it's about consistency and consistently working with these extraordinary human beings that add so much ingenuity and honesty that is essentially woven within the fabric of what you do. But it's also now bringing visibility to them and being transparent as to, this is who I'm working with and this is how we do it. Because the reality is, whether it is a Musa Maxwell or Teba Magugu or Richard Nisi or whichever designer, they can work with these communities, but what they do will never be exactly the same as what we do. I can't do what...
There's no competition
around...
There
isn't, and there shouldn't be. I can't do what Tebe does. I can't do what Rich does. I cannot do it. I can't do what Musa Maxwell does. It's better for me to be the best Lukhanyo Mdingi than to try be somebody else, right?
Okay.
So that's just the reality of being an artist that understands who they are and having quite a strong, grounded confidence of what they do.
And I think we're winding up. I hope, I found this conversation very insightful because I really come into these conversations as a student myself. Now to the order of the day, you've recently been named the 2023 winner of the AMIRI Prize. What is the AMIRI Prize? First of all, I think you've been part of a process to getting here. What is the AMIRI Prize? And what does it mean for you and your brand, especially with the plans that you have for 2024? What does it practically mean?
So the AMIRI Prize is an institution that is a mentorship that is awarded to emerging brands that are based globally. And it comes with a program for a year, but it also comes with a fund. And the way that we want to really implement it is to pretty much tell them what we want and how our business has grown over these last 2 years and how we can really penetrate certain spaces, acknowledging the fact that we're coming from Africa. Because the reality is we're not a brand that's based in the North. So the ways of how business laws and legalities look like is completely different.
Territorial, isn't it?
It's regional, and I think by having an international brand, you need to understand which international winners you're essentially going to be working with and which countries they're coming from, right? So it's really highlighting those things and being very clear as to this is the strategy that we have within our brand, but how, based on your networks, based on your ingenuity and your experience, how can you plug into the strategy to help propel us?
I must commend you and your team. I think
we're very thankful.
Yes, I must commend you.
We're very thankful. Thank you.
And do you find that you're being met with your expectations of collaboration with the brand?
Well, so far, yes, and it's still so early, but I mean, they've been so extraordinary. But I'm so thankful for the opportunities that the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand has been awarded. This is from the LVMH Prize, as well as the Andam Prize, because even with the Andam Prize, even though you might not win as a finalist, you still have access to the network, and they've been so incredible to us. So I really am so thankful for the opportunities that the Allen brand has received from these specific institutions. But with each one, our strategy changes, and we lean on to them to see how they can plug in their ingenuity to make our strategy stronger.
And it must start with a very clear strategy from the onset from you.
It does.
And I imagine you had to land that with them, and that's the connection.
Well, the thing is, the strategy was only shared once we had the opportunity to win.
Oh.
So, we had to go through an application process, but through the application process, you didn't necessarily have to share what is your year plan for the next, X amount of time. It was a case of what is your point of view,
I get that.
your products, who you are.
And to close, what would you say is your ultimate luxury? And let me preface this question is, it's a landscape, and you're allowed to meander.
I already know the answer.
As you please. Oh, I love.
It's very simple, actually.
What is your ultimate luxury?
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind.
Yeah. I have a very, very, very demanding career. And because of how demanding it is, it takes up a lot of my mind. And it occupies a lot of thinking and brain power. And so when I'm in a position where there's literally peace in my mind, I don't take it for granted, and I really soak in it because it refuels me. So peace of mind is really my ultimate luxury, not having to worry about anything.
And what are some of the practices that you do to ensure that?
Well, it comes through when there's a period of lulls, I guess, when there's a period of things slowly starting to slow down. It can come through having a little weekend respite away from Cape Town and being like 4 hours outside of the city. It can even come through like a 45-minute gym session where I'm just listening to my specific playlist and I'm manifesting, and I'm just really just thinking about just simple things, you know. So it interweaves itself in different ways in my life.
Well, thank you for sharing. You didn't have to share that last part.
No, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
And we're filming, or we're recording this on the day of the opening of the AMIRI store in
So
Sandton.
excited. So I cannot wait. I'm going to be wearing AMIRI head to toe.
Oh,
so it's
cute.
going to be quite a beautiful experience.
I have a child whose name is AMIRI.
Yes.
So I'm sure, and he wears AMIRI, so which is
stunning.
Quite a wonderful thing. But I have really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you have too.
Thank you so much. I have.
And I must mention, for the people that don't get to be in the room, that you have a beautifully calming energy and spirit.
Oh, thank you.
And I think I have achieved peace of mind because I was a little bit in as we typically do, multitasking this morning. But thank you for bringing peace of mind to me today.
It's such a pleasure. No, I really appreciate it.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you.